This is the DRS train.
What a brilliant 24 hours of Le Mans we had. Welcome to the DRS Train podcast. It's really weird to not hear this from Peter, but I'm your host, Nav F1, and today I'm joined by Ace, our resident Italian expert, and by Formula Jonah, returning guest for the second time to talk about all his knowledge about endurance. Welcome, guys.
Glad to be back. Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so Peter's not here today, so I'm going to be your conductor. Le Mans, so one of the classic all-time races, and we were treated to a classic. We had a fantastic race, and we're used to motorsport events really taking place during the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. That's when the action happens. But for Le Mans, that's not what happens. The action starts on Wednesday with some kind of general quali session, and then Hyperbole on Thursday. And a lot of people might think that quali is not as important for Le Mans. It's a 24-hour race, and then the drivers are going to end up being where they should be. Well, that's not really what happens. Quali is quite important, especially if you start at the back. And that's what happened to one of our main contenders. So, Jonah, why don't you take us through some of the surprises that we got? Because Toyota starting at the back, it really meant a lot for the race in the end.
Yeah, I think we should touch on that. That's a good transition point. Of course, not a good quali or hyperpole for Toyota in general. The number 7 car, of course, had that spin at the end with Kamui Kobayashi at the exit of the Porsche curves, which ultimately resulted in the car removing, in the FIA and the organizers of this race removing the lap times. And so the number 7 car would start at the back of the grid. And it wasn't much success either in qualifying for the number 8 with, I believe they started 11th in the event. So overall, a pretty difficult session for Toyota Gazoo Racing in general. And I believe I covered this in a qualifying report, this stat, that this is the first time at Le Mans in the hypercar era that we've never seen Toyota in the hyperpole session, or at least in the top 8, which was a shock considering that Toyota are one of the manufacturers to beat for this race. They have won it several times before, twice before with the GR010. And in general, it's difficult to understand why that happened. But yeah, ultimately it would they would be able to recover in the race, which was a good sign, of course. But yeah, qualifying was definitely not a good time. Alpine into Hyperpole was a really, really good sign, a sign of progression for the A424. Same goes for BMW in the hypercar session. And another entry that I was really impressed about, not in the hypercar category, but was the McLaren from Inception Racing, the LMGT3 effort, which ended up getting into hyperpole and achieving a big result with McLaren. So just huge congratulations to them. But ultimately, the big losers out of qualifying was Toyota.
They made many mistakes in the qualifying session, and ultimately it meant that when Kobayashi went off and he lost all the time, he also ruined the lap for all the other drivers. At the end, in qualifying, we didn't see the ultimate pace because when everybody started the last runs, their best efforts, they all went to nothing when the red flag came out, especially for the number 8 Toyota, which almost was gonna complete a lap more than good enough for Hyperpole.
Yeah, the Toyota number 8 was flying on that final lap, and I'm pretty sure both Toyotas would have made it easily into Hyperpole. We probably would have seen another Porsche as well, because let's not forget, we nearly didn't see any Porsche at all. I think the Porsche number 6 only made it into 7th, so that was a big talking point. And I just want to ask you guys, do you think the quali format works for Le Mans? Because I feel like 1 hour to get into Hyperpole when you've got 62 cars all going at it is just not enough. I guess they're trying to keep to a traditional 1 hour format, but we saw the issues here. The fastest cars didn't get into it, and it wasn't just due to circumstance. It was really due to one car spinning, and then all of the laps are done for.
Yeah, I would instead say it works even better than qualifying for Formula One, in which we have Q1, Q2, Q3. Well, it isn't much different here in endurance. We have something called qualifying, which is basically Q1, and then something called hyperpole, which is basically Q3, shootout for the pole. And yes, there there are many cars, which means that there are many yellow flags. There is traffic. There can be red flags stopping the sessions. Nothing that already isn't present in all the other qualifying formats, aside from one lap shootout. And we all know that also that format has problems. It's why it has been dropped. And something I would like to rectify is the number 12 Porsche who qualified for Hyperpole. The number 12 had crashed and it was ninth on the timesheets, but after the number 7 was taken away all the time set, they basically were in Hyperpole. But of course, the car was hit, they couldn't repair it in just one day, and so they didn't take part in Hyperpole.
Yeah, it really was a phenomenal effort from Hertz Team Joe to continue what you were saying there, Ace. And I think that it's astonishing that they were able to get that car up and running, a new car basically for the race as well. But yeah, but to answer your question, Nav, I think that it's quite interesting because we have, as Ace explained, qualifying and then hyperpole. You know, it's a very unique system. I think what the WEC should take into consideration is the fact of traffic, because that was a huge factor in this hyperpole and qualifying session. Not so much in hyperpole because of the not so many entries. But maybe it's something to take a look at IMSA and see what they're doing, considering they have a pretty unique system. And I think with Le Mans, I think considering there are 62 cars out on track, I think for Le Mans specifically, it might be good to potentially switch up the format and change to a system of GT qualifying and prototype qualifying. So that includes hyperpole and LMP2 for like a 30-minute session, and then GT for a 30-minute session. Probably a little longer though, because Le Mans is of course such a long track, of the Circuit de la Sarthe that is.
Well, another simpler option I considered was just making the quali session longer, because more time means more time to get a proper lap in.
That's true.
That's where I was getting at, that an hour was maybe too short. I'm fully fine with the hyperpole section of it. I think it really works. Just 1 hour is kind of what I think is the issue.
If they make the qualifying session longer, it means also that they need to bring more sets of tires, and so that's all with the same policy in Formula One. So they don't do that and simply run less. Something that took me by surprise is that the qualifying format for Le Mans is actually different from the other races of the season, because in Spa, in Imola, I remember, and also Qatar, I remember the qualifying format was there's the normal qualifying and the hyperpole shootout, but they're separated by class. So first you had the 15 minutes qualifying for GTM, then you had 15 minutes for hypercar, then 10 minutes hyperpole for GTM, and 10 minutes hyperpole for hypercar. And all on the same day. Instead, in Le Mans, they all go out together, all the three categories. The qualifying session lasts 1 hour. Hyperpole lasts 30 minutes, if I'm not wrong, and they're on different days. So I don't know why they do that. Is that a privilege that Le Mans keeps for being an historic race?
I think it's part of it. I think that another factor is that there's just so many cars out on track, plus the timing as well. If we had so many sessions, I think that we would reach more into the night. And because I believe that Hyperpole ended like almost around 8 or 9 o'clock local time. And so it was getting kind of late. I think as well, the factor that the reason why they have all the cars kind of together, or at least one of them, I think, is because there are 62 cars out on track in Le Mans. The Circuit de la Sarthe is over a 3-minute lap for just the hypercars. So they need more time to do this, and why not just combine all of them together? But I don't know. I think this system's been going on for a few years now, so it's worked pretty well. I do think that it would be interesting to maybe adopt what they have done in the rest of the WEC season, maybe schedule a little bit earlier and give more time for just GT and hypercar as well. So it's a very interesting situation. Of course, it ultimately worked out. A few entries didn't have the best of times, but it didn't affect the race too much. So we continue on, of course.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to mention about quali is the LMGT3 format. I find it fascinating how the drivers who do the hyperpole session are the bronze drivers. I'm not too sure why they do that, but it's brilliant because there was only one only the pole time was faster than any of the times on Wednesday set by the platinum or gold drivers, which is quite funny really because you would expect hyperpole to be contested by the faster drivers, but no, you had some of I don't know if the gentleman drivers, as they call them, taking part and who were lapping. One of them lapped 10 seconds slower than anyone else, so that was fun. Anyway, going into the race. Sorry, yes, you wanted to add?
Yes, on this point. Yes, during the 24-hour the commentary, they were talking about the driver lineups of LMGT, and they addressed this point with all the gentleman drivers. And they pointed out that back when the 24-hour wasn't as prestigious, when the endurance wasn't as prestigious, it was these gentleman drivers that kept the bot going, in a manner of saying. And so right now that the class, the race is in a healthy position, in a healthy, uh, yes, healthy. Now they get to reap the reward, to reap the rewards, and they get to race anyway. Even if there weren't these gentlemen drivers, we would see the Formula 3 drivers, maybe some Formula 2 drivers, which we saw none in this year, except for Ritomo Miyata in LMP2. And yeah, so I just wanted to point it out. Moving on to it's
Well, to the main battle. We moving on to the main battle we had. It ended up being Ferrari and Toyota, which was it unexpected? Let's just start with that. Well, was it an unexpected battle? Because going into the race, I think all the reports and all the rumors were that Porsche were going to get a 1-2-3, the easiest, most boring 1-2-3 in ages, which is funny really when Toyota had probably the easiest 1-2 in ever a few years ago. But no, Porsche were not up there. It was Ferrari and Toyota, and of course Cadillac, who we are going to mention later. But yeah, was it an unexpected course of events to have Ferrari just at the start blaze off and then Toyota start sighting through the back?
I think that I think we expected Ferrari, Toyota to be the two main contenders, but I also expected Porsche to be up there as well. And in fact, I expected them to be battling for the win and one of the main contenders. And that's because of their previous performance and how far they've come with the 963, especially considering that Penske brought 3 entries, which is great as well. Of course, Porsche qualified on pole position, so that was a benefit as well with the number 6 car. But yeah, I mean, into this race, I was expecting Ferrari to be the favorites just because Ferrari goes so well at Le Mans. The car is designed very well. The BOP was pretty good. It just all works out. And that was the same in 2023, exactly the same here in 2024. Of course, Toyota had a difficult start to this season. Of course, they did get that win at Imola. But in general, Toyota haven't had like the perfect start as they would in 2023 or years prior. So there was a little bit of like unknown heading into this race of whether Toyota would be able to find the pace that they had in 2023 and continue in 2024 and be as competitive. And I think that those rumors were proven that Toyota does have the ability to continue what they set out to do in 2023, which was beat Ferrari and reclaim the crown. There was a few things that just came in their way, which we will talk about soon. But yeah, I think that to touch on Porsche real quickly, the 963 has proven that it is very competitive. It has proven that it can fight for overall victory. Of course, it won Daytona, a race that we know is also very prestigious. So I think that Porsche has every right to be up there fighting for overall victory. They have the ability, they have the performance. It's just small little things that affect, and one of those I feel was the rain. I feel that the rain affected Porsche's win and Porsche's ability, and it's all still a learning game. You know, this is still just the second year of competition for the 963. So yeah, and these conditions we haven't seen really before since years before, and Porsche wasn't here with the 963 at least at that point.
Instead, I also think that Toyota versus Ferrari was totally not unexpected at all. And I would like to add that compared to last year, the POP between Ferrari and Toyota is much better. I think they were equally fast, when instead last year it always felt that Ferrari was slightly more favored. This year, not at all. This year, I think they were perfectly matched. And instead, I think that Porsche didn't have quite as good a BOP as Ferrari and Toyota, because Porsche usually has 5 cars out of a 19 cars field, so they're a quarter of the field. And with the entries allowed for Le Mans, they were racing with 6 Porsches on a 22 cars field, and only 2 qualified for Hyperpole, and 1 luckily, because a Toyota got its times deleted. And yes, the one that qualified did put it on pole, but then in the race, at the very end, they just didn't have the same pace of Ferrari and Toyota. And you watch the other clients' Porsches, the number 12, the number 48 with Jenson Button, and they couldn't keep up. So that leads me to believe that it's not that none of the 6 crews got the setup right. I think one of them got the setup right, and even with the right setup, they fell short of Ferrari and Toyota. So that leads me to believe that the BOP was slightly against Porsche, and I guess it's a trade-off, because at the first race of the year in Qatar, the BOP was clearly favoring the LM Le Mans Daytona hybrids instead of the hypercars. So not exactly an equal trade-off, but what goes around comes around, is that the saying? Okay,
Yeah.
it's that the saying. So the last car which was in the fight for victory was the Cadillac, which came here with 3 cars, right? The number 2, the number 3, and the 311. And Cadillac didn't quite impress. They were in the fight, but they always felt like they were outsiders. Just it was the number 3. At some point during the safety cars, they went on the alternate strategy, and
Number 2.
Number 2, thanks. They went on the alternate strategy to take track positions, and you see that in the next 2-3 stints, they just couldn't keep ahead. They were getting caught up by Ferrari and Toyota. So maybe also Cadillac didn't have the perfect BOP, but I think Cadillac actually didn't have the right setup, because there's only 3 cars, and during the entire year you only race with 1 crew full time. So Cadillac is hard to judge, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that last point you made is why I actually think that Cadillac was quite impressive. So I can see why you're saying that they could have been faster. But at some point in the race, I think in the final third of the race, I remember Earl Bamber's stint was really impressive. He was lapping like a second faster than anyone when they were leading. When they were meant to be pushovers, when they were on that alternate strategy, they were meant to just be there and then eventually be eaten up by the Toyota that was charging through, or the number 50 that was charging through, and they were holding up really well. And well, their crews are really strong. When you think about the drivers they have there, Alex Palou, Scott Dixon, Earl Bamber, Sebastian Bourdais, those are incredibly good drivers that they have there. Even in the number 311, Drugovic, Jack Aitken, those are drivers that you still have to go get. So they have the drivers, they have the crew, and I think at least for me, they outdid my expectations, especially in Hyperpole, because well, many people will be praising Kevin Estre for that, and I think that's fair. If it wasn't Kevin Estre in that Porsche, I think Cadillac have a 1-2 at least on Hyperpole, even though we know they had a penalty. So my point is more that Cadillac was quite impressive. It's a shame that in the end it didn't quite work out in terms of strategy and in terms of their pace in the rain, because they really could have been in that in that fight at the end. I don't think they would have won, but they could have been really close at the end.
Yeah, I just want to quickly point out as well that, as mentioned before, I think what ruined. Well, let me just point out first. Cadillac, I feel, had the fourth fastest car here, but I still think that that car was in contention for the overall victory. Toyota, Ferrari, and Porsche definitely were the main three. They were the main three to fight for the overall victory, but Cadillac was just hanging on there. They were just about there. But a major factor in this race, which I believe affected both Cadillac and Porsche, was not the performance of the car. As Nav, you pointed out, Cadillac have some of the best drivers across the entire grid. And same with the crew as well. Same goes for Porsche with the Penske entries, the Jota entries, the Proton entries. So I don't think it was the performance that ruined Porsche or Cadillac. I think it was strategy, and I think it was the car, because as we remember, Porsche and Cadillac are both using the LMDH regulations, where Ferrari and Toyota are both using the LMH regulations. The conditions were very hard to deal with. And so LMH is front-wheel drive, where LMDH is rear-wheel drive. And so in conditions like this, to have an LMDH car is very difficult. And also, this is just the second race at Le Mans with these LMDH cars, so it's still a new learning curve as well. So I definitely think that the factor of rear wheel drive versus four-wheel drive affected this race as well with the conditions. So I believe strategies just didn't work out for Porsche and Cadillac. It just didn't go well. And then add on to the fact of the rain, the conditions out on track with these LMDH regulations, it just didn't match up. But I do think that Porsche and Cadillac had strong performance, and I think that they made huge steps forward at Le Mans, and hopefully they'll come back stronger in 2025.
One point about the 311 Cadillac. When they restarted from the safety car, I was closely watching the fight for the lead because the 51 was just 9 seconds behind. And instead the 311 was a whole lap down. And so I was closely watching because I expected that the group would slowly open the gap in between the cars. And so the 51, which was 9 seconds back, would basically enter the same group. And so I was closely watching that first lap, if that actually was going to happen, if the 51 had the pace, because I was cheering for the 51, not the 50. And simply when the 311 has a red livery. So when I was closely watching behind, and at some point I suddenly saw this red car going fully into the barriers at full speed, and I jumped out of my seat and said, fuck, the 51 put it in the wall. And it took all 30 seconds to understand that it was a Cadillac instead. And the 311 then was able to get out of the barrier with the rear suspension was completely tilted, right? And they still managed to get back into the box and fix the car, and they got out with 2 hours left, or maybe even less. But still, it was impressive that they got the Cadillac running again, considering it was a strong hit.
And well, a last point on Porsche then. Do we think the number 6 are still favorites to win the title, just the wet title?
Yes, 100%. I'm just gonna put that straight out there. The number 6, apart from Le Mans, has been the most consistent car across the full WEC. They have been on the podium in every single race except Le Mans, and they were 1 second behind the Ferrari 51. So they could have easily gone on the podium. So I still think that they have a very good advantage. And I think another reason to point towards Porsche having an advantage with the number 6 car is that we're heading into 2 tracks that none of these hypercars have been on to before, that being Sao Paulo, of course, Interlagos, and then Lone Star Le Mans, which is at the Circuit of the Americas. The only manufacturer that has been to the Circuit of the Americas so far is Toyota and Toyota Gazoo Racing back in 2020 when they raced there. However, that was with a different car, the TS050, a totally different entry, which is an LMP1. And so we're heading into 2 races that are kind of unknown, and the races that Toyota Gazoo Racing has been very strong at is the races that they have experience at, which would be Le Mans, Spa. These are classic tracks. Fuji, for example, their home event. So I think heading into the unknown, Porsche will come with a good result again. They think they'll bounce back stronger at Sao Paulo. Add on to the fact that Porsche themselves have a little experience at Sao Paulo, because the last time we raced there was in 2014, and Porsche, of course, were present with the 919. So Yeah, I think the number 6 car is definitely still the favorites. However, there are a few entries like the 50 Ferrari, like the number 7 Toyota that could still spoil the party. I think we're going to get an awesome championship fight.
There's one last thing I need to point out about that number 6. The stints. Vantor raced nearly 12 hours, whereas Lutterer spent 3 hours and 15 minutes in the car. That's not something you see often at Le Mans at all. Some people have been saying that Lutterer is washed. Some people have saying that Lutterer was just not that good on the day. He was clearly struggling. He's an experienced Le Mans driver, multiple time winner, I think 4 times winner, but it just wasn't his day at all, was it? And you pointed out how the LMDH was hard to navigate in those conditions. He seemed to be the one who was worst affected in the entire crew, maybe the entire Porsche crew.
Yeah, I think at the beginning that was Porsche Penske's plan was to do what they did with Lauderer, Vantor, and Estra. But yeah, it seems that Lauderer was struggling out there. He wasn't having the perfect race. But this is a driver, of course, that we know is extremely experienced across pretty much all categories. He's raced in Formula E. He raced in Formula One, I believe, once at Belgium in 2014 with Caterham. And then yeah, of course, when it comes to endurance racing, he is the legend, one of the legends of Le Mans recently, with his multiple wins with Audi, his participation with Porsche. So this is a driver that's got a lot of experience, a lot of talent, and I think that it just wasn't his day, and sometimes that's how it goes with certain drivers.
Yeah, that's well put. Well, I think now is the time to go towards that frantic last period of the race where everything just well, the race was altogether really good. I wanted to watch the start and then just follow some of the highlights on YouTube, but just watching the start got me hooked for like the first 6 hours, and then I think I spent 12 hours watching the race. Fortunately, I was sleeping during that 4 hour safety car period, which again, that's another thing we can mention later on. The safety car system in endurance in WEC isn't fantastic, but yeah, that final 3 hour period where it really started to become clear that the main contenders would number 50 Ferrari, the number 8 Toyota. Number 7 Toyota was coming back from quite far. They had an issue because of the number 51 Ferrari, because the Ferrari was just like in Mario Kart, it was just using a blooper on the screen, so whichever car was trying to overtake them. So the number 7 Toyota seemed out of contention after one of the safety car restarts because they had to pit. De Vries didn't see anything because of the rain and the oil on his windscreen. At first, a lot of critics were like, "How bad can it be?" And then everyone saw the onboard, and we understood, yeah, it's quite bad. He couldn't see anything, and if anything, it was really dangerous. And he did a really good job at getting back to the pits with that car. So yeah, the number 7 was an outsider. The number 51 again, just like last year, an outsider. And then the number 8 pits just behind the number 50. The wheel gun doesn't work properly, so they take a 20-second. That's a 20-second gap to the main number 50 Ferrari, and number 51 hits number 8. So first incident of that period. Do we agree the 5-second penalty for the number 51 Ferrari is just comical? You cannot give a 5-second penalty for that incident. Of course, it wasn't a racing incident, but you've wiped out from contention a rival car and at a crucial time of the race.
Ace, do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
Go you.
Alrighty,
You
so
go.
I think that it should have been stricter. I do think it should have been. I don't think it should have been like some sort of like crazy like I don't know 3 minute stop and go penalty or something like that. That would be too much, of course. But I do think it should have been a little stricter, and I think that goes for a few of the incidents. I think we saw it earlier as well in the race with that dramatic crash for Dries Vanthoor in the 15 BMW with the 83 Ferrari. I think I believe Kubica got a 30-second time
30
penalty
seconds.
for that. Yeah,
Top
and
end.
so yep, and so it was. I think that should have been a little bit harsher, like to the point of maybe like 45 seconds. Because this was this resulted in a car out of the race. I think the team principal or the owner of Team WRT mentioned the same fact that it should have been a little stricter. So I think that penalties should have been just a tiny bit stricter, not to the point of like a 3-minute stop and go penalty or something like that, but yeah, just a little bit more. And I think that the 51 Ferrari, if it got a little bit more of a stricter penalty, it would have been off the podium. So it definitely would have affected the result. But yeah, that's how it goes. You know, it's in the past now. There's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can do, or at least the organizers can do, is retake a look at some of the things that happened during the race and kind of question and go like, well, okay, maybe should we have gone for a little bit of a stricter penalty, or should have that been something else, or the same? But yeah, I think that the 51 Ferrari's penalty should have been a little bit more strict.
I think that in general, the stewards weren't strict enough with the penalties relating to racing incidents. Instead, they were perfectly fine with the penalties given for unsafe release, for infringements, for all this technical stuff. But instead, the racing incidents, they were absolutely very forgiving, because Kubica absolutely wiped out a BMW out of the race in an incident harsh enough to cause a safety car, and they got 30 seconds, which at Le Mans is basically nothing, because 30 seconds, you are half a pit stop behind, and just a safety car easily gets you back. Or not even half a safety car, even a lucky slow zone, you immediately gain back 30 seconds. So
Exactly.
that should have been, I think, a lap, a 3 minutes stop and go penalty, something like that. And even with this current incident between the 51 and the 8, yes, 5 seconds are mild, are basically nothing. And there was also, towards the end of the race, Ferrari into safety, pit lane procedures. They were investigated for pit lane procedures, and then they were just reprimanded. So it's a bit of a shame that we don't know exactly what this investigation was about, because pit lane procedures is anything that could happen in the pit lane, so it's not an answer per se. And yeah, so I think the stewarding was actually fine compared to Formula One. They were, how do you say this in English? They were homogeneous with their behavior. They were mild with racing incidents, but they were always mild. They didn't just give a harsh penalty to one racing incident and then a much milder one for basically the same racing incidents but different cars, which is what we see in Formula One or MotoGP. And so I think the stewards did a fine job, maybe a bit harsher on the racing incidents. That's it.
That's true, because if you're giving 30 seconds to that Kubica incident, then 5 seconds is fair for Pierre Guidi. I think it was Pierre Guidi in the car at that moment. But yeah, it should have been harsher generally. And then after all this, there was the number 50's door. The number 50 seemed clear, completely clear, and then the door wouldn't close. And that lasted a lap or two. Of course, that's also an issue that's become famous because of the Ford versus Ferrari movie. Ken Miles's door didn't close, and that really happened in 1966. Had to be shut by a hammer. They didn't have to use a hammer this time, but there was a major issue, and Nielsen, of course, couldn't even reach for the door because of how the hypercars are nowadays. It was quite funny because when showing the cockpit view, he had his arm on the Mulsanne straight trying to reach for the door, which obviously is more than a meter and a half away. But that could have affected the race greatly, wouldn't it, Ace?
Yes, at 2 hours before the end of the race, I basically gave the 50 out of the race, because they had done a pit stop, the one in which the door didn't close properly. And when they were released, it was something of an unsafe release, because the mechanic with the hula hoop, whatever it is called, gave the signal to go. Pierre Guidi hesitated for a moment, so the hula pop guy brought back down the signal because a car was incoming, and instead Pierre Guidi started going, then stopped, then since it had started, tried to go again, and then got alongside the car that was incoming, let it through, and then slotted it behind. And that's a very close call for an unsafe release, in my opinion. I think that ultimately the car he didn't enter the pit lane, the white lines of the pit lane, in front of the car, so they let them off. But at that point, I was thinking that he was gonna get an unsafe release penalty. And then he didn't have the door that was closing, so that meant an immediate pit stop. And so I believed, yeah, this is unrecoverable. Even if a safety car is to come out very soon, there's gonna only be 30 minutes of racing, and yes, you're gonna have to overtake 5 cars. Impossible. So I gave the 50 for a goner, and instead, then in the next 2 hours, things turned on themselves completely.
Yeah, just a small thing. I think it was Molina at that point who had that incident because Piaguidi is in the 51. So it was either Molina or Nielsen. I think it was Molina at that point who had to deal with that. But yeah, so in the end, the 50 didn't get any. They only got a reprimand, and the reasoning is that yeah, they didn't come out in front of the car they were released next to. They did let the other car through, and that some people complained about it, but I think it's fair. If you are giving way, then you're not really impeding on anyone. And while all of this is happening, while the number seven, they're not getting any issues. They had all their issues with the oil on their screen, and they were basically, I think they were P10 or P11 when they had to pit earlier than everyone. But now they were in the mix. They even were what were they? They were the main contender at some point, and maybe the main issue at that point was that the driver in the car of the number seven was a driver who had only been told he was in the car. What was it, Jonah, 10 days before the race?
Yeah, a couple days before, and that's Jose Maria Lopez, of course, driving for the Akotas ASP Lexus. So quite remarkable.
Yeah, Lopez, who, well, for the F1 enthusiasts who listen to us, he was meant to get a drive in Formula One in 2010 for US F1, a team that never came about. And Lopez, he's generally regarded as perhaps the weaker link in the Toyota team. He's never had as good as a reputation as well his teammates Conway, Kobayashi, but even the sister cars drivers have always been rated a bit better. And then Conway's injury led to Lopez having to race in a stint that could have led to a win. Another thing is the number 8 has won Le Mans 4 times, but the number 7 car, which is meant to be the main car of the team principal Kobayashi, they have only won once in 2021. So they win contention, but then, yeah, Lopez started spinning.
Yeah, and I think that it's quite interesting that you put Lopez in the car and he's just fine. You know, he gets in, he's back to it. You know, he's back in the car, and I think the team principal or somebody, an advisor of Toyota Guzzi Racing, mentioned that it was like he never left basically when they put him back in the car. And so to go from an LMGT3 machinery to a hypercar machinery, one that's very different, I might add, from Lexus to Toyota, even though they are similar manufacturers, of course, is quite astonishing. You know, I think that speaks of Jose Maria Lopez's skill. You know, I think he hasn't been given as much credit as he deserves, considering he's a pretty good driver. And I think that his stint in the Toyota throughout this race was pretty good, and I think that he did a pretty good job. And I think that it's of course sad, and we should probably mention the fact that Mike Conway not missing or missing out on Le Mans was incredibly unfortunate, you know, and we wish him all the speediest of recoveries. But I think they couldn't have picked a better driver than Lopez to jump in that car.
Yeah, on that point, on the driver they chose, because before the race I was thinking, well, if they want to substitute Mike Conway, they might as well put Ritomo Migliata on the car.
Right.
They were brave enough to put Hirogawa
Yeah,
on the car.
Hirakawa.
On the car for 2023, I believed, well, they're gonna put Miata for 2024 for this one off, and instead they chose Lopez, which I perfectly understand why they chose Lopez. He already knew the team. He already has a lot of experience. He didn't really left WEC because he was still driving in LMGT3, and so it made perfect sense. And then in the race, because Migliata was in LMP2 on the number 47 Cool Racing, and the number 47, when it was getting broadcasted its fight with the number 22 during the last hours, and in the end the 22 won, and so that meant the 37, which was battling with the 22, was also in the fight for victory. And what I saw in Miyata's stint was that he was stuck behind the 22. He was clearly faster, but he just wasn't able to put the overtake. And at the end of the race, the 37 had problems, so they didn't finish. Yeah, but we saw the limitations of Miyata, which further proved that Lopez was the perfect choice for Toyota. He hardly did anything wrong except for the spin at the end.
That's a good point. Lopez should be praised for turning up and performing the way he did. And just towards the very final moment of that race, how did you guys feel about it all? Were you confident that the number 50 would make it through? So going into the last hour, it was, let's say after the Lopez spin, were you confident the number 50 were going to make it, or did you still think there would be some Le Mans magic, something would make the number 7 through, or since as soon as the spin happened, you knew it would be the number 50?
I feared that we would get a number 5 Toyota 2016 moment where that car stopped in the final few minutes. Not, of course, it would be a different issue. But I feared it. I think the reason why I feared that is because Ferrari have made so many mistakes. Not of course, specifically, but Ferrari just in general. If we look over in Formula One, I mean, considering this is primarily a Formula One podcast, I'm sure everybody knows what's happened with Ferrari in the past with pit strategies and all that sort of thing. But this is of course an entirely different operation. And I think that Ferrari have grown quite a bit in general when it comes to motorsport. And I think I did have a little bit of confidence in them, because my thought was like, why would they make such a big mistake in the final hour of the 24 hours of Le Mans when you're leading a race that they have won before, a race they've won 10 times before, Ferrari. And I think that this is something that eventually I trusted, and I looked at the data. I was like, okay, I see their point. I see that they can do this. And I think what kind of gave me the ultimate confidence that the number 50 car would survive with enough was when Nicholas Nielsen came over on the radio and he said, "Leave me to it. I've got it. I've got this taken care of." And it was kind of like this confidence booster of like, okay, he's got it. We can do this. So yeah, I think I was speculating a little bit just because of past stuff that's happened with Ferrari in general. And I was fearful of a similar situation like what happened to Toyota in 2016. But I do think that Ferrari showed that they have grown quite a bit. They have the experience, they have the talent, and they have the ability to win, and they have the drivers to do that and handle that situation very well. So yeah, I think eventually within the first few minutes I gained confidence and was hopefully hoping that everything would turn out great, and it did.
Just before you jump in, Ace, you pointed out Nielsen, Jonah. Nielsen was the standout of the race for me, the standout driver, because he's not a driver. Even last year, I remember I always thought the number 50 was much stronger than the number 51, who I believe won a bit, well, thanks to the circumstances. But Nielsen, I looked him up a bit and I looked up his story. His story is absolutely incredible. He was in German F4 in 2016 and 2017, finished 8th and 6th, very middling, nothing that even gets you promoted to Formula 3 or even FRECA. So he was out of the drive, and in a lot of interviews said that he was considering going to university. He was done with racing. And then Johnny Lawson, a Danish team owner, wanted him to coach his son in 2018. So Nielsen said, sure. He coached his son, the young son of Johnny Lawson. I think he was only 14 or 15 at that point. And he was rewarded with a one-off GT drive in a Ferrari Pro Challenge something Europe, or one of the Ferrari One Make series. Did really well, impressed. Eventually got a full-time drive. Won 10 out of 14 races. Obviously, the Ferrari higher-ups noticed that, because if you're doing well in a One Make series, that's what eventually gets you into a GT drive. And that's another thing that we should be pointing out to maybe casual listeners. It's that endurance racing do not pick their drivers over who have the best credentials in single-seaters or the best achievements. A lot of them get picked up through factory drives and GT drives in endurance races. So Nielsen then just worked his way up through the GT categories, then LMP2, and then he gets a hypercar drive with the Ferrari at 25 as a Danish driver, which really needs to be pointed out. You don't really get a Ferrari drive as a non-Italian driver when you're that young, unless they really trust you. And in that race, well, during that first stint, when it started raining, and that was an important point as well, it started raining. Some drivers pitted, some drivers didn't. He was so composed. He told his crew, "I've got it under control." A bit like what you said at the end as well, Jonah. He always seemed like he was confident in the car, and that's what you want as an endurance crew to hear. And at the end as well, yes, he managed well, but he finished on 2%. And to give that confidence to not just the team, but all the tifosi, all the millions of watchers of Le Mans, that you have it under control when you're 26, and again, relatively inexperienced compared to the rest of the grid, that was wholly impressive.
I believed that the 50 was going to win once I saw that nobody was saying anything about the unsafe release. The pit stop they had to make for the door actually didn't force them to pit one more time, and especially after Lopez spun around at the Dunlop chicane, because at some point during the last 50 minutes, the number 50 had an advantage over the number 7 of 40 something seconds. And so I just thought, well, perfect. You pit now, you put 10% of energy, you go out, and you either are slightly ahead of the Toyota, and so you're still in the lead and with plenty of fuel to go to the end, or you are slightly behind, but now if you are slightly behind, it means you also have more energy, and so you can attack. So
That
I
would have been
actually
incredible. Can you
that would
imagine
have
a
been
final lap pass of the 50 on the number 7? That would have been insane.
I mean, what actually happened was also impressive because he only finished with 3% of energy, so it was tight. It was all down to whether it was gonna keep raining or not. And if it didn't keep raining, the track would have gotten faster, and that meant he either wouldn't have gotten to the end with the fuel he had, or he would have been caught trying to reach the end with the fuel he had. Instead, the weather condition defended Ferrari's victory. So it would have been more impressive if they had pitted and go for a straight fight, but I think it was also interesting what actually happened. I just want to pick up on the point about choosing the drivers for endurance. It's true because we never see much lineup changes in endurance. We have Kobayashi, Buemi, and Hirokawa, and before it was Buemi, I think I just messed up the names.
It
Oh,
was
Natsuya.
Buemi,
Nakajima.
Nakajima, and Hartley for a lot of years. Before that, they had Alonso for a bit. But especially the number 7, I think that the point you're making is more the number 7, because they've had Conway, Kobayashi, Lopez for what is it, 6, 7 years?
Yeah, it's got to be something like that. I can't
Yeah.
even I can't even think how far it's been. That's how long they've had those 3 drivers. It's been before Hypercar for sure. It's been through the
Yeah.
LMP1 days. Yeah.
And also the number 50 lineup because they carried it over from GT3 back in 2020, 2021. So and then you see Peugeot, you see Porsche. They got one lineup and they are keeping it for this year. And there's no talks at all about changing them for next year. And even more generally in the 24-hour Le Mans with the free invitations, constructors don't seem to actually make use of them because Ferrari didn't use it, Toyota didn't use it, Peugeot didn't use it, Cadillac, Porsche, and Lamborghini use them, and then nobody else. So, just thinking, is it that hard to find good drivers? We have 20 drivers in Formula One. They have the weekend off to go do the 24-hour Le Mans, and there is nobody willing to take them. I don't like this thing, but it's been this way for so many years. I just think that the Formula One drivers are a bit of cowards for not trying to do the 24-hour Le Mans because I don't want to hear it that they can't get a drive. If they wish, they can get a drive for the 24-hour Le Mans.
Yeah, of course, we remember in 2015, Nico Hülkenberg, he's the last driver to make the jump, and he won with Porsche that year.
The
Yeah,
last
indeed.
driver was Alonso.
Yeah, but I meant to make the jump. Oh, yeah, he did do Le Mans in 2018 as well. That's a good point.
I think you're mentioning the last driver to do F1 as well as Le Mans in the same year,
Yes.
because Alonso did do it in 2018, but or wait,
Yeah, he
2019.
was in F1. Yeah,
He
I
wasn't.
also thought
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah, 2018
Yeah,
and 2019 was the super season where they did, 9 races and twice the Le Mans. So
I
yes.
it
believe
was a
so. Yeah.
weird crossover. Alonso drove in 2018 both WEC and Formula One together.
Indeed.
Yeah, the 2017 to 19 was those weird 2 years for Alonso where he did the Indy 500, twice Le Mans, 2 entire Formula One seasons. Yeah, that was interesting. Well, moving on from all the front runners to the midfield of the endurance grid. Usually, thinking about the midfield, you would start thinking about some other big brands. But no, the midfield in endurance this year has been the privateers. And those privateers, I think, have impressed a whole lot. I think even the factory teams did not expect the privateers to be doing that well. Jota have been basically best of the rest, and they've been wholly impressive. They won in Spa. The Proton Porsche, they were the most entertaining car at the Spa race, with Julian Andler seemingly overtaking everywhere. And of course, the IF Corsa Ferrari, the number 83, they were leading the race on, they were in the net lead of the race for at least an hour. Kubica was so impressive, defending against the number 50 so hard. And again, some people were not too happy about that, but it's still an endurance race, but he wasn't doing anything dangerous. He was just defending hard against another Ferrari, and they're not in the same team. They have the same. They have this technicality where they are AF Corse, but they're not the factory team, so they can still do what they want. So yeah, all those privateers have been really impressive this season, but we even saw one leading Le Mans for a good chunk of it.
Yeah, I think this just proves how much Hypercar is like taking what Group C had and making it amazing. I mean, Group C had all these extra customer entries, notably with Porsche. You had the Rothmans car, you had the Martini, or not the Martini, but you had the Rothmans, you had the Yost, you had the Kremer. You had all these other Porsches, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing here with Hertz Team Jota. You got Proton Competition over in IMSA. There's JDC Miller Motorsports as well. So I think that we're going to see this privateer or customer efforts continue even more as the years progress. And I think that it would be interesting to see how this progresses and all that sort of thing. I just want to point out a fact real quickly before we move on. But the entire top 10 in Hypercar was on the lead lap when they finished the race. And that is the first time in history of the 24 hours of Le Mans where the entire top 10 has finished on the same lap. And I think that just another backup fact to say that Hypercar is a success. This is something that we've seen. This is something that we know. The Hypercar class is going to be a success. It already is a success. But I think that this just solidifies that fact that they are the Hypercar class is a major success with top 10 or the top 10 all separated within the same lap. And also the finish was so close. It wasn't as close as the 1969 Le Mans where it was just a few car lengths between the first two cars. But yeah, I think Le Mans is in a perfect place. So I just wanted to point that out there with the top 10.
Yeah, and just to add on to that record you pointed to, yeah, to that record you pointed out, yeah, the top 10 finished in on the same lap. The previous record was 2, so it usually is an achievement when there are 2 cars on the lead lap. There had never been 3 cars on the lead lap, and we had 9 or 10 cars this time. It's more than impressive. It had never happened in more than literally in 100 years of competition.
A
Absolutely.
quick Quick correction is the top 9, because after the 83
Oh, yes.
retired, it was Lamborghini, the number 63, jumped into
That's
10th
right.
place, but they were a lap down because another thing that helped having 9 cars in the lead lap was having 2 full safety car of how long did they last in total? 5 hours, 6 hours? Yeah, so because it's the procedure is new, they have been trying to make the safety car procedure such that all the cars on the lead lap they get bunched up together. Maybe not exactly behind the hypercars and then the LMP2s and then the GT3, but still on the lead lap and just 30 seconds back at the worst. Because otherwise, I think the two Porsche privateers, the number 38 and the number 12, they didn't look to have the pace to keep up with the other cars, with the ones that actually fought for the win. So yeah, I think the safety car helped, but it's still absolutely true that there were six cars, all strong enough to win the race, and all that could easily stay in the lead lap over 24 hours. So that's an
Agreed.
absolute achievement.
Yeah, as we said, the factory Porsches were struggling, so the customer Porsches really seem to be struggling, which hasn't been the trend in endurance at all this year. As we said, the Jota number 12 won the race before Le Mans, but the standout for me in terms of priorities was that number 83 AF Corsa yellow Ferrari, which is driven by three drivers that single-seater fans will know very well. Robert Kubica, of course, but also Robert Schwartzman, who never got that F1 drive, but he was, I think, the youngest driver in, I think, the second youngest driver or the youngest driver in the hypercar category. Well, not counting Isotta, of course, but in the main teams, if I can say so, he was the youngest driver with Callum Ilott. And he did a great job. And the third driver is Yifei Ye, the Chinese driver who also has a very good racing record in GT, so and in endurance racing. So yeah, that number 83, it's a shame that they got involved in that atrocious incident with the BMW, and that the race came undone for them because of the electrical issue. Do you think they would have been in the top five by the end? Because they were in the top five for the entire race until then. So
100%. Yeah, I think that that car was performing at its best. I honestly, midway through, I was kind of like, I bet that the 83 cars got this race win. I think that there's a very good chance that it could have an opportunity to win. And I was honestly betting on it because of how quick that car is. This is basically the third factory Ferrari. We pointed out that this is technically a different team. I would consider it as the two factory cars are Ferrari AF Corsa. The yellow car is just AF Corsa, but it's all AF Corsa technically. So it's basically a third factory Ferrari. But the drivers they have are arguably as competitive as the factory entries. I mean, Robert Kubica alone, I think, is a driver that people should really consider as one of the best in motorsports in the 2000s for sure. I mean, his Formula One days, rally, LMP2 recently stand out as great performances. So I definitely think that the 83 Ferrari had a good chance of winning this race, as it has throughout the rest of the season. And it is good to see that it will return. It's not like a one-off entry. This is a car that is a full season entry. And it's really great to see a yellow Ferrari out on track as well as the other two red cars.
Just to solidify how good the lineup is. So Robert Kubica is a proven driver. Even after the injury we saw in Formula One in 2019 with the Williams, and then his two outings with Alfa Romeo, substituting for Kimi Raikkonen. Yes, he's not as good as he was before, but he's not washed at all. He's still a very good driver. Then Robert Schwartzman, I think that everybody who follows Formula One and also Formula 2 already knows how good he is, his potential. And then Yifei Yi. And maybe Yifei Yi is much lesser known than the other two, but he's actually also a very good driver, because Yifei Yi is basically Guan Yu Zhou, but poorer. He's just as good, but he didn't have as much money, so he failed to make the jump to Formula One. Instead, he got into endurance. Last year, he was in the Hertz Jota team with the privateer Porsche, which had just debuted for Le Mans. And despite just debuting with a car they got 1 week prior the race, the Hertz Team Jota team was leading the race, and they were leading the race with Yifei, which was under the rain going faster than anybody else until he put the car into the wall at the Porsche course. So he's fast, Yifei. He's a very proven driver, I would like to say.
Yeah, that car is definitely fun to follow, and they had a proper chance. Moving a bit further down the midfield now, we can look at all the 2024 rookies. I think we can consider them the BMW, yeah, the BMW, the Lamborghini, and the Alpines. Now, the Alpine, they're very technical rookies, right? They were there in the LMP1 days, but they performed like rookies because for some reason they've chosen Mecha Chrome engines, and yeah, they retired after what was it, 8 hours?
4. Yeah, it's been yeah, they were the 35 car retired with 4 hours and 20 minutes remaining of the race, which was just, and honestly right now, as when we're done with this podcast here, I'm going to continue to work on a video. I'm working on the disaster of Alpine at Le Mans, because it really was a disaster at Le Mans. It was catastrophic. Both cars suffered engine issues and were out within the same hour of the race. 4 hours only completed. And yeah, it was just a horrible race for Alpine, and I think the same goes for BMW as well. Difficult race for them, and I feel it's more down to luck. You know, the 15 car got that collision with Robert Kubica, and it got taken out of the race. Otherwise, it was in a pretty good position. The 20 car crashed earlier on with Robin Freins, and it's just that car was in the garage for the entire time, basically. So yeah, I think that BMW and Alpine really struggled. And out of the new manufacturers, that would be Lamborghini, Isotta Fraschini, Alpine, and BMW. Out of those four, if we're going to discuss that, Lamborghini performed, I feel, the best. And I do think that Alpine was the most competitive out of the four. But then again, at Le Mans, you need a car that's both competitive and reliable. To endure at Le Mans is to have a car that can last to the end of the race, and that's what Lamborghini had. And I think one of the reasons why they were able to do this was partly because they had experience with the SC63 at the 12 hours of Sebring, which was, of course, a race that's very bumpy, very atrocious. It's 12 hours as well. So take that experience as well as the other events in the WEC, combine it together, and they have two cars on the grid, two cars with very experienced drivers. And I think a lot of people, on at least on social media, I've seen, are not praising Lamborghini as much as they need to be praised, because I mean they finished P10, I believe, with the 63 car in the top 10, which is great, and then I believe the 19 finished in 13th, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty decent Le Mans for Lamborghini, especially in those conditions. Very, very good performance. But yeah, and I also want to mention Isotta Fraschini, but we can get into that later on as well. It'd probably be good to stick with the main three manufacturers, if we'd like to call them that.
So, to make a list of the best newcomers of Le Mans this year, there would be Lamborghini on top, because they actually finished. Then there would be BMW, because they didn't finish, but just because they were unlucky, they had some crashes, not all their faults, and so they didn't finish the race, not necessarily by their own fault, and they were competitive. They set the fastest lap time in qualifying, and then they couldn't repeat it in the hyperpole only because they crashed the car, but still they proved they were fast, and that's already a great achievement. Alpine also proved they were fast, not as fast as the BMW, and furthermore, the Alpine was unreliable, but not just, oh yeah, we had 15, 16 hours into the race, we had two different reliability issues. No, they had the same reliability issues within 6 hours of the start of the race. So, complete disaster, Alpine. I think they were the worst team at Le Mans overall. And then there would be the Isotta, which has completely different ambitions compared to the other three. And then, if we really want to add them, we could add Peugeot, which came up with an entirely new car at Imola just 3 races ago by now. And so maybe they could be considered newcomers in the sense they don't understand the car. So how do you evaluate Peugeot?
Well, I was going to get into Peugeot just in the next section, but that's a good introduction for the section that's going to come in a few minutes. Lamborghini, as you said, they were really impressive. What I really liked is after that first, when the rain started, that first rain section of the race, when 70% of the grid pitted, they stayed out. I thought that was really courageous because they were running fourth and fifth for a good few dozen of minutes. I think it was for maybe 30 minutes where they were fourth or fifth until the others caught back. But that was good running for them. I think they must have enjoyed just being up there. They have some decent drivers, two Italian drivers in the number 19 car with Romain Grosjean, and then in the number 63 it's Eduardo Mortara and I think two other Italian drivers. So they
Mirko
have
Bortolotti.
good. Sorry?
Oh, Mirko Bortolotti is one of them.
Yes.
Mhm.
So they have some good lineups on which they can build upon. I think they will be very happy with their performance because, as Jonah said, it went under the radar, but they definitely did what they wanted to do. And they have said at the start of the year, this season is an extended test session for them. Finished 10th and was it 12th or 13th in a 24-hour test session? That's really good.
I actually wasn't very impressed with Lamborghini's pace because they fell 2 laps down purely on their own pace. So that was a bit disappointing, but still, they are newcomers. So I think maybe it's just a bit disappointing because BMW looked they would have done better than be 2 laps down. But then again, BMW is actually a 2023 project. It's already 1 year of experience, so clearly BMW has to be better. So maybe, and I think what's actually impressive of Lamborghini is that they, unlike many other constructors, came up with a new entry, with a second entry for Le Mans. So they brought which was the new entry? The number 19
And
or
number
the number
19.
So the number
The
19
Instacar.
was the new entry, which is the IMSA car and crew. So still, nobody else did the same. Alpine didn't bring another car. BMW didn't bring another car. Peugeot didn't bring another car. So uh, they came up to the race. Maybe they didn't have the best race pace, but they had two reliable cars. I think that's plenty enough. Furthermore, they beat Peugeot. So
Yeah, and I just want to point out the fact that Lamborghini bringing that second car was very valuable. I mean that was great for them. And it's of course an IMSA entry, so having that experience from IMSA as well with the 12 hours of Sebring is very valuable to them. But I just wanted to point out real quickly with Lamborghini and Isotta Fraschini as well. These are two manufacturers that are brand new to prototype endurance racing, where BMW and Alpine are somewhat familiar to it. Of course, BMW, their last experience was with the V12 LMR back in 1999, which was quite a long ways ago at this point. And then Alpine has been of course racing before with the A480, the LMP2 entries, and so on. But yeah, Lamborghini and Isotta Fraschini, brand new to prototype endurance racing, and to see both of them as the manufacturers to finish at Le Mans is very impressive. And just touching on Isotta Fraschini for a moment, but like this is a manufacturer that is completely new to racing, like as an endurance racing element. Lamborghini, of course, has experience with Iron Lynx through the GT categories and all that sort of thing. But Isotta Fraschini hasn't been around as a manufacturer since basically the 1930s. Of course, the company was revived in 2022, but this is a very new project, even newer than the case of the SC63 with Lamborghini. So with Isotta Fraschini, it's great to see that they are doing so well. I mean, this 24 hours Le Mans, the objective for them was to finish the event. That was the objective. And so to finish Le Mans with the car, the 24 hours of Le Mans, a race that is known for being one of the longest events of the season, with a manufacturer that is very new to this sort of racing, is just absolutely impressive and just proves that they, as a small manufacturer, should be taken more seriously, and I think that they have the potential to do even better. And the fact is, they are learning, they are experimenting, they are doing well, they are improving in every way. And I think that they're going to continue to do so, and so they're making great progress for sure.
I'm just gonna catch the ball sent by Jonah and we're starting the Isotta Fraschini section right now. So, because yes, they did extremely well, but before we talked about privateers, and privateers nowadays are nothing more than teams taking the cars of the constructors and running them on their own. But Isotta Fraschini is actually a privateer in the old sense. They are a small group. It's basically Michelotto Engineering. It's this society. No, maybe not society. I don't think I know the right word. It's a company.
Sorry.
Yes, it's basically this company. They used to collaborate with Ferrari, and then they decided to go on their own, and so they built a project from nothing. They built their own engine. They built the car basically, and then they found a team that would run the car for hypercar for the endurance racing, and so basically they're the real privateers. Because they're the small team running on their own, and they also build the car on their own. Basically, like Jordan, Sauber, and Minardi were doing at the start of the 2000s in Formula One. So that's a real achievement. Also, they built the car on their own, and the engine lasted 24 hours. Alpine Alpine didn't build an engine on their own. They bought an already present engine, the Mechachrome engine from Formula 2, and they simply modified it to meet the endurance requirements. And then the engine failed. So completely two different budgets, completely two different ambitions, and yet Isotta Fraschini completely outclassed Alpine in this way. And about improvement, Isotta Fraschini is really improving. They're severely lacking testing time because after the Duquesne team took over the car, the Duquesne team didn't set any testing time at all, so they simply ran the car during the actual races. And that means they lack a lot of data, of experience on the car. And we saw that that's actually what is making the difference with the car, because for Le Mans we had last Sunday a test day, last Monday a second test day, then we had free practice, qualifying, second free practice, third free practice, and then a fourth free practice sessions before the race. That means a lot of track time, and we saw that the Isotta Fraschini was much closer to the rest of the field this weekend than the others. We saw that they were 3 seconds off the pace and over 13 kilometers, and they were 3 seconds off the pace at Spa over 7 kilometers. So they basically halved the gap. And then we also saw the two young drivers, which we discussed about last podcast at the start of the year, about Serravalle and Bennett. And Serravalle and Bennett, which were much closer to Vernet this weekend because they had much more track time.
Well, about that, firstly, I still think that when they will eventually improve on Serravalle and Bennett, they will be closer. But also, well, I'm sure, Jonah, you will know, do they only have Serravalle Bennett because they bring a lot of sponsors and money in, or because Isotta is a hypercar, for sure they can attract some better names, at least some gold drivers. Why are they running, well, Bennett was literally in the equivalent of Formula 4 last year. Now he's in hypercar.
So I could be wrong on this, but let me just share my information. And this is also information which I've discussed with the Isotta Fraschini themselves. But Jean-Carl Vernet is the main driver. He is the driver they put all their money into. He's the driver that is the main one. He's the big driver. Antonio Serravalle and Carl Watana Bennett are both drivers that have experience, have talent, but of course they haven't been given the machinery to be able to fight with the hypercar. I think that part of it is that they're new drivers. Isotta Fraschini doesn't have a lot of huge money to bring in a full ton of experience and drivers that they need money, of course. But yeah, they have those two drivers. But then, for example, Carl Watana Bennett is a Duquesne driver, so he's a driver from Duquesne, and they're bringing him in, and that's part of the agreement kind of thing, that Duquesne is bringing in Carl Watana Bennett, which is great, of course, and then Antonio Serravalle as well is coming in as well. So I think that it's a mix between bringing in money, bringing in talent, bringing in young talent, young drivers to help that team progress, help that manufacturer progress. And then also it's part of Duquesne as well with Carl Watana Bennett coming in. He's a Duquesne driver, racing ELMS, I believe, with Duquesne in the LMP2 days. So yeah, I think there's a couple of multiple factors, but the main one is that Carl Watana Bennett and Antonio Serravalle are both drivers that are the new drivers, where Giancarlo Vernet is the experienced one. He's the driver that's the main link of the team. He's the driver that Isotta Fraschini are spending like all the money on basically to get in.
So just 3 hours ago, there was an article on Motorsport.com Italia about Isotta Fraschini. So they commented on the end of the race and on the future prospect, because yes, their objective was to finish the race, and it was such a important objective to them that after the sun rose again on Sunday, they basically lapped 5-10 seconds off the pace, simply to bring the car home at all cost. And 5 to 10 seconds off the pace means they were as fast as the LMP2s. So I think the best we saw of Isotta was at the start, when they overtook the Lamborghini and then made a double overtake down the Mulsanne straight to the first chicane on the first lap, and they overtook a Peugeot and a BMW, and then they kept them behind for 3 laps, which is 10 minutes, so not long at all. But then even in the first stint, they could kind of keep up with the other cars, so that's a huge improvement. And about the future prospects and about the drivers, because we've got to also admit that Serravalle and Bennett are clearly off the pace of Vernet, and so it doesn't really matter, because even if they have 3 proven drivers on the car right now, the car would still finish last. Not 9 laps from the first, maybe only 2 or 3 laps, but still last, absolutely last, for 100% last. So it really doesn't matter that they have bad drivers, because they aren't yet on Verne level, but they are improving, and all it matters is that by the time that Isotta becomes semi-competitive, also they have good enough drivers. And I think right now the prospect is towards the end of the year that Isotta will be somewhat competitive. So we got to see at the end of the year if Serravalle and Bennett where they are.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Ace, and I echo your words, because like these are 2 drivers that are kind of new to this hypercar formula. This is something that is something new for them. But in general, this is totally a learning year for them, for Isotta Fraschini, as they progress throughout hypercar. And I just wanted to point out, before we kind of move on, of course, that Isotta Fraschini have been considered and associated with the Van Wall of 2024. Because if for those that are unaware, Van Wall competed in 2023 and were very back of the grid, and it just didn't go good. It really didn't go good. They didn't continue into 2024. Their entry was rejected, although they are looking to return in the future. But I just want to kind of correct that statement of the Van Wall of 2024. I don't think Isotta Fraschini are the Van Wall of 2024. They are not on the same level of Van Wall, because I feel that, and this is no disrespect to anybody, but Van Wall didn't really progress throughout the season. They kind of just stayed there. I mean, they were making improvements throughout the 2023 season, but it was hard for them to do that. It's hard for them to continue to progress in pace and all that sort of thing. Where I feel that Isotta
They also
Fraschini
had driver issues. They also had
Yeah.
driver issues. They had driver changes, whereas Isotta seems like a very rigid, compact, secure franchise at the moment.
Yeah, that's a very good point to mention. Van Wall were having some driver issues with Villeneuve wasn't in the car, and then he got replaced by, I believe, Vautier, if I'm not mistaken, Tristan Vautier. And then there was Joao Barbosa and a few other drivers as well. I think Ryan Briscoe is in Bahrain as well. But anyway, the point is that Isotta Fraschini, you can see them improving. You can see them improving race after race. It's getting better and better. At Le Mans, at the start, we touched on this already. They were already like in the fight. They were in the fight where you could see at the start of 2023, Van Wall and even Glickenhaus at times were just dropping back, and it wasn't going good. And Isotta Fraschini, you can see that they're making improvements race by race. And I mean, of course, for these smaller manufacturers, I want them to do well. I want Van Wall to do well. I want them to return at some point. I want Glickenhaus to return. But in general, it's hard for that to happen. But I do think that Isotta Fraschini are making improvements, and I think they even mentioned as well as the fact is that they are a small manufacturer that has been given the opportunity, and they're proving to the WEC that small manufacturers still matter in the championship, and small manufacturers can continue on with the series.
Well, I believe that for 2025 they have only allowed 22 cars onto the hypercar grid, and that with also 2 car maximum limit for every team. So I think Isota really did well in that race, not just for them, but also to show the ACO that they're serious about this and that they should be given another chance. Because if they were the Van Wall of 2024, then there would be no chance of them appearing next year.
Just about this point, about next year, about the maximum cars limit, and still about Isotta, they were on the article. They were wondering, they were waiting for the FIA to specify better these car limits. Only 2 cars are allowed. They are asking, but can they be run by different teams? Because Isotta thinks that if they can be run by different teams, then they can sell their second car. They say they are able to fill the second car for next year. They can. They have the finance to do that. Finances, thank you. And if possible, they would do that with a different team, because they would earn more money. So hearing this statement is good, because there's a future. They're not gonna be dropped like Glickenhaus and Van Wall, and I like that because Isotta is the underdog. Everyone liked the seeing Isotta finish the race, even if they were lapping at the end at ridiculous times.
Isota should sell the second car to Alpine then. Maybe then Alpine would have a better chance of finishing, because yeah, Alpine going for the Mechachrome engine when everyone saw it coming, it wasn't a great decision. Well, the final car we haven't mentioned now. Sorry, Ace, you wanted to add?
No, just a quick thing about the Alpine engine, because the rumors are in that Formula One, they aren't going to keep the progress, the development of the 2026 engine for Formula One.
Right.
And so they're looking to convert the Virili-Châtillon factory for the endurance program. So they would build the engine especially for endurance, instead of using the Mechachrome for Formula 2. So that's a thing to keep the eye on. You can move on to...
Well, the final team that, what can we even say about them, because they shouldn't have been there, Peugeot and their new car. Well, that's the plus point. It's a new car, so there's time. They need to understand the car. Apparently, Peugeot was satisfied with the performance, which seems surprising, but they seemed kind of happy with it. But last year when they had this extremely original design with no wings, they found themselves in second place during the rain. During the rain part of the race, but also just after that. This year, they were absolutely nowhere. And a lot of people are already saying that they will very probably be the first to jump from the championship, because usually French manufacturers, they don't really tolerate failure well. When it doesn't go well for them, they will not hesitate to just leave. So what were your conclusions on that Peugeot performance? Should we give them time because it's a new race, or was it too unimpressive to really be apologetic towards them?
Yeah, give them time, I think. I think give them time, because this is a car that debuted only 2 races ago at Imola. And in that Imola race, they were caught up in an incident and were having issues. I think the 93 car had a gearbox issue during Imola. And so it's Spa was kind of like their first real race. And even then, the Peugeot 9X8 doesn't really perform really well. We saw that in 2023. But Le Mans, again, a new race for the 9X8. Every race is going to be a new race for the 9X8, because this is technically a new car. It's got some changes. And so I think that we should give them time. It was a very disappointing result, I think, for Peugeot. But I think another factor to add on to this is not just because of the 9X8, but the BOP did not help Peugeot during this race at all. They were negatively affected by it. So that car was very heavy. It was very difficult. And so, I mean, this race was definitely different from 2023. Worse in competition form. 2023, they were fighting for the win at times. But of course, that was a different car, a car that they have raced before. Where this is a car that they've barely even raced before. So I think that if there's any concern whether to like potentially look into stopping the program or like I don't know, moving towards a different concept or whatever, that would be decided around next year's 24 Hours of Le Mans. If Peugeot are still performing like this for the next 3 or 4 races, we have 4 races left of the 2024 season, that being Sao Paulo, USA, Fuji, and then Bahrain. So if Peugeot is still performing at those next 4 races like they did these 3 races, and then they're also still performing badly in 2025 and towards Le Mans next year, this is a similar result, then I would consider maybe Peugeot are looking into stopping the program or moving aside or whatever. But that's a long period until 2025. We got so many races in between that. I believe that's around 8 races, 7 or 8 races in between. So I would definitely give them time. And I believe that for Peugeot, once we get to Fuji, I think they'll have a better understanding of their car. I think Sao Paulo and the next race at Coda is going to be a learning race for Peugeot. They're going to really gather that data. They're going to really figure out that car. And then when we come to Fuji, a track that they have been competitive at, in previous seasons, a track they have raced before twice, with a 9X8 hypercar, I think that is where we're going to start to see the 9X8 performing a little better and getting better in general.
I think instead that so far the performance from Peugeot has been disappointing, because yes, the car is new, that is, it changed a lot, but at the end of the day they can only spend 5 tokens to change the car, so I don't think they spent all the 5 tokens, so most of the car has to be the same as it was before. So it already smells to me that they got the new car and they couldn't be competitive, because before Le Mans they also came out and said that the balance of performance was a bit too harsh on them, and I think for Le Mans it wasn't exactly good compared to the other hypercars, but it was still an improvement from the previous 2 races. But that improvement really didn't look to be there on track, because they were still fighting with the Lamborghinis and they lost. So good that they finished the race, because Alpine and BMW didn't manage to do that, but they need to improve, otherwise if by the end of the year they can get any relevant result, I think it's pretty much going to be a disappointment as a project, not only as a year.
Yeah, I agree with that, because we need to understand it's Peugeot and they have Le Mans heritage. They are spending a lot of money on this. The drivers they have, those are not drivers that you get for cheap. Those are not paid drivers. Those are very, very experienced and just famous drivers. To put them in that seat, I mean, we're talking about Loic Duval, Le Mans winner, Van Dorn, Vergne. Those are drivers that don't come for free at all. So Peugeot will be looking for some results in the near future. And proportional to the coverage of the categories at Le Mans, I think we've spent 85% of our time on the hypercars. Let's move on to the 2 other categories, because they make up for 2/3 of the grid, but they definitely did not make up for 2/3 of the coverage. LMP2 and LMGT3. Those also had quite a lot of attention, because LMP2 are not racing in endurance this year. They are racing in endurance. They're not racing in the WEC. And 16 of them came for, well, I didn't know that, but they came for what is essentially a one-off Masters race where no points are awarded for their actual championship. That's nice of them. I thought maybe they would even get double points for that race, just like the hypercars do, but they don't. And LMGT3, there was so much attention about how many brands would be involved, manufacturers, and not even privateers in the sense of Isota or Jota. That those are all yes, private teams that are running manufactured cars, but those are all brands that people know: McLaren's, Lexus, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsches. Ford, the Ford Mustang that people loved because of its width and size. So much attention goes towards promoting that category, and then for the race we got what, 7% of the coverage was directed towards them. What did you guys think of it? Was it fair considering how good Hypercar was this year and, how much the fans expected from that category, or do you still think it was a bit unfair to bog down the GT3 category so much? I think it was definitely unfair, especially as during some parts of the race, they would show a Peugeot doing a pit stop or an Alpine and a BMW fighting for P11, when you could literally see on the timing boards that an overtake was happening for second or first in the GT3 category.
Yeah, I think that I just want to point out the fact with the LMGT3 coverage and LMP2 coverage versus Hypercar. I think that it was a little unfair to not include so much. There should be more coverage on these two other categories from the WEC, and I think that Hypercar deserves the majority of coverage. The Hypercar category is the biggest class in the WEC. It's understandable why it gets all this coverage on it. It is the main class. It's the main category that everyone is coming to look at. However, with LMP2 and LMGT3, I think they do need a little bit more coverage, more than they have right now. I think that there's some incredible racing going on in both categories. And as someone who likes the hypercar class pretty much the best, I want to see more coverage of LMP2. I want to see more coverage of LMGT3 because that's what makes Le Mans is the three categories, the multi-class racing element. And I just want to point out when it comes to LMP2, the LMP2 cars, there's 16 entries out on track. 15 of those 16 are all from the European Le Mans series. Every single one of them except one is from ELMS. The one entry that's not is from the ALMS, which is the number 45 CrowdStrike APR entry, which I believe won the LMP2 championship in ALMS this a few months ago. And so it got the invitation to Le Mans as well. And that's what this 24 Hours of Le Mans is so interesting, is that it's all about the invitations, all the extra entries, it's all about invitations, it's all about other series. Because, like, for example, Hypercar, I'll just go to point this out here. For example, Hypercar, the extra entries, the majority of them are all from IMSA. The only time that we've seen an extra entry that hasn't been from IMSA was the 709 Glickenhaus last year. That was an entry that's just extra for Glickenhaus. Where all the other cars are basically from IMSA. We got the two Cadillacs, we got the number 19 Lamborghini, and technically the number 4 Porsche as well. They're all from IMSA. And that goes the same for LMP2, that goes the same for LMGT3 as well. So that's one of the beauties of Le Mans, that we have all the motorsports come together for one big race effectively, with all their entries, or a lot of the entries at least.
I think that both LMP2 and LMGT3 there simply isn't enough information to properly follow them, because LMP2 basically races only one race, and so how can you come to know the crews, the teams? You just see. The best you can do is you look at the entry list of the drivers. If you see a driver that you know and that you like, you're gonna cheer for that crew during the race. That's the best you can do. There is no story prior. It's hard to get invested in LMP2, and also similarly for LMGT3, even though it has a much more history, recent history, I mean, and there are some famous names. Valentino Rossi with the BMW entry. There are the Iron Dames that are still looking for the win, and they've been very strong but unlucky. But also in LMGT3 there are many crews where there is the gentleman driver, and that goes so slow that these entries basically can fight for the win. So again, it's difficult to get invested into LMGT3 as much as you would for Hypercar, especially when there is a year in Hypercar where it's halfway through the race and you have 10 cars on the lead lap, all 10 that could win. I think it's a no-brainer to follow Hypercar and ignore LMP2 and LMGT3.
That's a good point you made about LMP2 because, yes, they do race in the European Le Mans series, but I think if they wanted to get people more involved or more invested, they maybe should have at least made us understand that. Well, I understood it because I follow motorsport and because I'm involved in a few chats who explained it to me. But otherwise, yeah, you just see that category pop up at Le Mans. and no one
Right.
really knows what's going on, and also, why they're there. I only knew yesterday that that race isn't even part of their championship. So yeah, as Ace said, you just pick a few drivers that you remember from other categories. That number 37 car was really interesting to a lot of people because of Miata, but also they had the very young Lorenzo Flusha and Malte Jakobsen, who is also extremely young and a Peugeot reserve driver, young reserve driver. But it was hard to get invested because of how little just information they gave to us, especially for the LMP2 category. And yeah, LMGT3, as soon as Valentino Rossi's number 46 car retired, I swear we only got like 10 minutes of it.
Yeah, the LMGT3 coverage was centered around Valentino Rossi, which is understandable. This is a driver that has so much success in MotoGP. He's one of the drivers that brings so much attention to motorsport. So it's understandable why they're focusing on that 46 car. But I think that LMGT3 showed off some pretty good racing in general. I think that it proved why Le Mans and the WEC is moving towards the GT3 regulations. We had so many manufacturers involved for the overall victory. And of course, these cars are brand new to Le Mans. They've never raced. None of them have. And so, yeah, I think that it definitely deserves a little bit more coverage, at least LMGT3. I can understand why LMP2 doesn't get as much coverage. But yeah, LMGT3 deserves just a little bit more. And yeah, I mean, for me as an American, I like to see Ford and Chevrolet do well, and for Ford to see them back at Le Mans is incredible. It is great to see that the Mustang is racing, and to see it doing pretty well. It got on the podium, of course, third and fourth for the two Mustangs in their first race at Le Mans, which is absolutely incredible. And when you hear that car go past, as I have heard over at Laguna Seca, it is absolutely incredible, and it proves why Ford is such a manufacturer that a lot of people are bringing attention to.
I was thinking about what I was saying, because before I was saying that the Formula One drivers are a bit of cowards for not trying out the 24-hour Le Mans. But then, if they did come to the 24-hour Le Mans, they would steal the news absolutely anywhere. Jenson Button didn't do much during the race, but he was still followed by the coverage, how the 48 was doing. Then they didn't have the pace for the win, so they kind of faded out of the spotlight. But if you had Verstappen, if you had Guan Yu Zhou, if you had Leclerc, Leclerc could easily join the 24-hour Le Mans. And
Well, we had the best example in 2018 when Alonso participated. I mean, it was incredible that it was the 24 hours of Alonso. It was only about him. And, arguably in 2019, some people still say that Toyota maybe gave a favorable strategy to Alonso because the number 8 car had to win because there was too much at stake. That's what would have started to happen, I think, if you started having some main drivers, as you said, Ace, from Formula One move over. Because, yeah, if Leclerc did a race in the Ferrari AF Corse for number 50 or something, you wouldn't see anything else.
yes, that's exactly the point. LMGT3, LMP2, as if they didn't exist. Nobody would even care about them if Leclerc, Verstappen, Alonso, they all come and try out a race here. They would absolutely steal the spotlight. So I still want to see them here, but fair enough. LMGT3 and LMP2 need showtime, and it's hard to balance this all out, especially in a very competitive hypercar field.
And I just want to point out something real quickly as well, that it's not just with the WEC, but we saw this with the Indy 500 most recently in 2024, when Kyle Larson from NASCAR came over and raced in an Aero McLaren. There was so much attention on him, and I think it's just inevitable as racing fans. As someone, for me, I mean, Kyle Larson grew up about, 30 minutes from where I grew up in California, and so it's someone that I support over in the NASCAR series. And so it's inevitable for me to see that, I want to see what Kyle Larson can do. And I think that's just something that the broadcasters are going over for everybody. It's like a NASCAR racer at an Indy 500 race. Like, let's get so much attention on that, and that goes the same for the WEC. You know, a motorcycle rider in a race car, a BMW race car in a GT category at one of the most challenging endurance races in the world. I mean, that's quite the headline right there. So it's inevitable that we are going to see that. So I just wanted to quickly point out before we move on.
Yeah, that was an important point to make. Well, that leads us to our very final section where we just talk about the tops and the flops of the race. It was a 24-hour race. It's hard to really think about individual drivers, individual cars, but we're still going to try to do that. As I said, my standout driver of the entire race was Nicholas Nielsen, because what he did with that number 50 car, both in terms of confidence, but also in terms of strategy, was really impressive. Also, with the management of energy and fuel. And of course, Isota, they deserve the credit for simply finishing the race and also putting in a good shift. And finally, that's a bit of a curveball, but Toyota were really impressive with the number 7 crew, because, as we discussed, Chito Lopez, he was not meant to be there at all. He was thrusted into that race, and of course, he did cause that spin, but those were very tricky conditions. He was never meant to be there in the first place. And they started last in that hypercar category. They started last, and they were a few minutes maybe away from doing a last to first at Le Mans, which would have been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, I think that Toyota was the standout manufacturer, at least in the hypercar category for me at Le Mans. Because we knew that Ferrari and Porsche would likely be up there. We knew that Cadillac had some pace according to Hyperpole and qualifying. Toyota was kind of like an unknown. We knew that they had the experience. We knew that they had the ability to be there, but it was still kind of like, where would they fit into all this? And I think that they performed really well. You know, Nav, you just mentioned that the number 7 car started at the very back of the grid, finished second at the end of the day, which is a very big performance. And of course, it is Le Mans. It's a 24-hour endurance race. But I think 2024 kind of just continues my thoughts from 2023 when it comes to Toyota, because in 2023 Toyota came up as runner-up as well in second place with the number 8 car. Same situation with the number 7 car here in 2024. And I think that in 2023 they proved that they had a very competitive race car, but were ultimately beaten by Ferrari, and the hype was thrown out against Ferrari. You know, they were the class of the stars of the show, I guess that's the words to use. But yeah, Toyota, I think, performed the best as a manufacturer in 2024. I also want to highlight Isoto Fraschini for doing such a great job with getting to the end of the race. Same goes for Lamborghini as well. Really strong performance from them. And I think another manufacturer I want to mention as well is Ford. You know, this is a brand that is just recently coming back to Le Mans this year, and Ford has the Mustang, and they're bringing back an entry that or a car that has never raced at Le Mans, but has raced in IMSA and the WEC beforehand. But it performed well. The 77 car was in contention for the overall win, and the 88 and the 44 eventually finished in third and fourth. And if it wasn't for that issue with the 77 Mustang, it's possible that Ford could have gotten all 3 cars up there, potentially even the race win. And so I want to say a very, very strong performance from Ford. And as for the downsides of Le Mans, you know, I think the biggest one was the rain, the long period of rain that we had, where it really affected things. Of course, this is something that's out of control for everybody. There's nothing we can really do. I think I echo Tom Christensen's words on the commentary box when he mentioned we just got to get this race going. You know, this is something that we've done before, where we've raced in these conditions, and race control eventually listened. And I mean, they made, of course, their own decision, and they went through with the process. But yeah, of course, the rain did affect things, and that was unfortunate. But again, out of control. And then the biggest losers, I'd say, from Le Mans, and this is no disrespect to them, but Alpine. You know, this is a manufacturer that is coming to Le Mans for the first time since 2023, or first time since 2022 in the top category at least. And I think that Alpine just didn't perform well. The A424 was competitive, but not reliable. And I mentioned before with Le Mans, you need a car that's competitive and reliable, and that's something that Alpine didn't have. And to see the car retire within the first 4 or 5 hours, both cars retire from the first 4 or 5 hours with almost the same issue, which was engine related, is just it's just heartbreaking. It's unfortunate, and hopefully they will come back stronger. But it is very disappointing considering they are a French manufacturer at a French classic. It is just is just disappointing, and I feel for them, and they will come back stronger, of course. But that's Le Mans. That's part of it. Losing is part of the 24 hours of Le Mans. Having the heartbreak is part of the 24 hours of Le Mans, and all they can do is bounce back stronger.
For my tops, I would put the 83 Ferrari because this entry is only of this year, and they managed to put, despite not getting the best picks by virtue of being newcomers, they still put together an incredible lineup because Yifei, Kubica, and Schwartzman are absolutely proven drivers, and it's true, during the race, during the 24 hour of Le Mans, the 83 looked to be the best Ferrari, so they should have won the race, and they were gonna do better than the actual official cars. So I think there is no reason to not put them in the tops. Another top is the 15 BMW because they were fast all throughout the weekend, and they were unlucky to retire because Kubica absolutely yeeted the car into the walls. And but otherwise they were fast, and that was important. They were competitive, really competitive, with the other Cadillac, Porsche competitive level. So incredible achievement for the first year at the Lance. And finally, I would put in the top the balance of performance for this race. I get it that Porsche, Cadillac, maybe the Le Mans Daytona hybrids were a bit disadvantaged, but by this point, the BOP has really gotten far better than it was a few years ago. If we are here discussing that the BOP was the reason because Porsche and Cadillac were just slightly slower than the Ferrari and the Toyota, well, there's a limit. These are all cars that finished within they were within 20 to 40 seconds after many hours of racing. That's a win for the BOP. We're not seeing a difference of laps over 24 hours. We're just seeing difference of seconds. That's a massive improvement. BOP is really working this year. They screwed it up a bit in Qatar because it clearly wasn't suited for the track. But then Imola and Spa and then Le Mans, it proved to be balanced, very well balanced. Not perfect, and clearly with the gaps we see now, perfection is gonna, even this little difference will become clearer and clearer, but that doesn't take away from the effectiveness of the BOP. Then, as for flops, I would put absolutely the safety car, because let's address this what happened during the race, this problem. The problem is that the 24-hour Le Mans in its entire history was never red flagged. So they don't want to lose this prestigiousness. They don't want to lose this record of never red flagging the race. And so they decided to keep the cars out for 4 or 5 hours under the safety car, even though they were red flag conditions. And it's pretty much stupid to do that, but if they did red flag the race, then by what they did in Spa last month, then they would need to recover the hours they spent under the red flag, because otherwise, as they said, they didn't race 24 hours. So I would just want to imagine if they did 4 hours of red flag. I think that if by 16 the race director said, okay, this is not the end of the race, we're gonna go for 4 more hours, I think the entire crews, the mechanics, the engineers, would have just mobbed him out of existence, because they were absolutely finished. 24 hours are extremely harsh, and so you can't just extend them because you want. And so I think this just further proves that making those 2 further hours at Spa last month was stupid. And they shouldn't have done that. And I get that they have good reasons, but there are just exactly as good reasons as simply finishing the race without fulfilling the 6 hours. They wouldn't do that at Le Mans. And yes, at Le Mans they wouldn't red flag, but we see that when they don't red flag, we get 5 hours of safety car and nothing to talk about. So I think they simply shouldn't have done what they did at Spa.
That's a good point, because even though everyone loved what happened in Spa because of the racing, it did set a really weird precedent for the next few races. Because if there are similar instances, how do you navigate that, and how do you judge how long a race should be? We could have ended with 30 hours of Le Mans.
Right.
And it's fine a 6 hour race that's in an afternoon, like in Belgium, but if you're doing it for a 12-hour race, if they did that at Sebring, of course it's not the same regulations, but if Sebring decided to do that for a 12-hour race, or of course Le Mans, then it becomes a big issue. Well, I think unless you guys have any more to add, we have reached the end of our second WEC detour. Yes, Ace.
We might talk about the rules for next year, because FIA announced the new calendar for next year, and then how they are gonna um, deal with the cars in hypercar, with the official cars. So as for the calendar, I just quickly wanna say it's the same as this year, the same 8 races in the same order. And we have yet to go to San Paulo and Austin, so I can't say much about that. But I can say about Imola that it was really good for the track, because we know right now that in Formula One, Monza and Imola really seem that one race is going to be off. And I think that if one race is going to be off, it's going to be Imola, not Monza. And so that Imola was able to get its place in endurance was very good. It also means that they can now start working on making the pit lane, the garages, bigger, for a bigger field of cars. So they can actually have the 40 garages required for endurance. And it's also a 4-year deal. So it's not only going to be next year, it's going to be up until 2028.
Okay.
It's an incredible victory for Imola. As for the rules about the hypercars for next year, from what I understand, all constructors in hypercar are obliged to field 2 official cars, and the maximum official cars in hypercar can only be 20, which fits perfectly with the 10 constructors we're gonna have next year. The point is about the privateers, because there is no more room for the privateers, and that's a weird problem to deal with, because there's an entire rule set that was created specifically to allow privateers to race and be competitive, and then next year there are gonna be only 2 slots for privateer cars entries. So we're gonna see if FIA changes things, or how that is gonna work out, but it's a bit iffy.
From what I've understood, maybe Jonah can confirm this. Cadillac might ask Jota to run their entries.
That's correct. Yeah. So Hertz Team Jota is very, very likely to switch to Cadillac next season. I think the rumor is right now, and this really actually, when it comes to the WEC grid, it really actually matters what IMSA is going to be doing. And this is because this kind of centers around Cadillac, because Cadillac have to make a decision who's going to be running their IMSA project and WEC. For IMSA next season, there's planned to be 3 Cadillacs on the grid, one from the Action Express team, which is the red Cadillac. And the other 2 I've heard is going to be from Wayne Taylor Racing. And so that would be quite interesting. And if that happens, the rumor is that WTR would take over the IMSA project and Hertz Team Jota would take over the WEC project. If that's the case with this new rule in place, I expect that Jota will relinquish their 2 Porsches. One will go to JDC Miller Motorsports over in IMSA, and the second will go to Proton Competition in the WEC. That's my thoughts. So that means less Porsches on the grid. And that could make way for more manufacturers. And the hard part is that all these manufacturers look to continue into 2024 or 2025. However, Aston Martin will bring 2 Valkyrie LMH next season. So that there has to be room. Lamborghini will add on a second car for sure. Isotta Fraschini are looking very likely to add on a second car. Same goes for Cadillac. So at the moment, there's not enough room. And this is why I'm kind of like, what's going to happen? Are they going to expand the grid size, or are they going to have to remove a few entries on the grid? And with Van Wall also looking for a return, there's just too little space for the hypercar entries. So I don't know how this is going to go, but Hertz Team Jota look very likely to take over the Cadillac projects. And I think that that is where we're going to see the news come from, because it's almost pretty much confirmed that Iron Lynx will run a second car, and Cadillac is kind of the catalyst of it all. Whatever happens with Cadillac will set the grid for the rest of they'll set the news for the rest of the grid.
Well, a question I have is the privateers, do they also have to field 2 cars?
No, I believe they don't have to. So they could do whatever they want, basically.
There's a clear problem in that the hypercar rule set is far too successful, and so they have too many entries for hypercar, and that's leaving LMGT3 and LMP2s out of it. There aren't as many entries, and so that's a problem that FIA are gonna have to deal with. But I think that Peugeot, unless they improve, aren't looking likely to continue. So we're gonna see how long this wave of success is gonna last before many manufacturers start to leave the category.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what happens and all this sort of thing. As I mentioned, Cadillac's kind of be the catalyst to see what happens. You know, what decision they go with when it comes to their team. If it's Hertz Team Jota, then that starts the next process of where do those Porsches go. And the rumor is that at least one of them will be going over to IMSA. And I think it's possible as well that we could see a few entries head over to IMSA as well. There's also a rumor going around that the Asian Le Mans series will run hypercars, which is very, very unlikely, but still a possibility. And so if there's not enough room for any of these entries, for example, if privateer entries, there's not enough room, like a second Proton competition car, ALMS could be a perfect opportunity for them. Same goes for Vanwall potentially with their entry. Who knows, really? It's going to be interesting, but I think the fact is that we want to see more hypercar entries, but we also don't want to see that affect the LMGT3 grid, and that mean like taking away entries, because LMGT3, there's also more entries wanting to come over there as well. Mercedes is a perfect example of this. They have an AMG GT3 that could potentially race. Audi looks very unlikely to join, but there are rumors of them joining. But yeah, like for example, Mercedes, they want to get in. They want to get into the WEC. They've made that clear. But honestly, right now, there's just no space. So it's either the WEC either makes more room, gets a bigger grid size, which is very unlikely. The realistic option is that there will be 40 entries in 2025. Or the other option is that they reject a few entries and either kick a few entries out, which would be very unfortunate, or they just say, let's move them aside into IMSA, for example, or ALMS. There has to be a solution to this, though, for sure.
40 entries, meaning 22 hypercars and 18 GT3s?
That's the rumor right now, is that 22 hypercars and 18 LMGT3s. It doesn't look like LMGT3 is going to be changing from this year. It's really about hypercar, and I think that there should be 4 more spots on the grid in the hypercar category. The question will be which of those entries are gonna be filling in. I know for certain that 2 of them will be the Valkyrie LMH Aston Martins. As confirmed during Le Mans weekend, Aston Martin will have 2 entries on the grid. And then it's going to be a toss-up to see if it will go to Isotta Fraschini, Lamborghini, Cadillac, or if privateers will be kicked out. Who knows? It's kind of unknown at this point.
And the final question is, the limit is 40 because of the bit sizes, or is there
Yes.
another reason?
I think it's mainly because of the pit sizes. Like for example, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be Imola that doesn't have enough space, or one of these tracks there's not enough space for more cars on the grid. They would need to expand to a larger pit. I think that certain tracks, like Le Mans, for example, have more space, but certain tracks do not. But then again, Sao Paulo, for example, Coda, I think they have space on the grid. So maybe there's a potential for more entries. And the WEC said that they probably won't be going beyond 40 entries for 2025. Maybe in the future if other tracks reorganize or whatever. The fact is, though, is that we should see at least 4 more spots on the grid. And yeah, I think it's down to the pit size if they're not going further. That's one of the reasons for sure.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our second DRS Detour, again on the topic of endurance racing. It was a fascinating race. I invite all of you guys who maybe didn't watch the race to check out the highlights or just to check out reports, because it was really just scintillating from the start to the end. That's a bit of a lie. The safety car hours were not as scintillating as the others. But another good thing with the Le Mans is the commentary, because we got treated to some very nice commentary on any stream. The English broadcast, the Spanish broadcast started singing during the rain period. The Polish broadcast decided that Kubica was not at blame for anything that happened in that incident. So yeah, it was fantastic to follow. And thank you very much to Jonah and Ace for joining me today.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for having
Jonah,
also me on.
of course, thank you, Ace. Where can we find you on the waves of the internet, Jonah?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me is on YouTube at Formula Jonah. Same with Instagram and X/Twitter. Those are the three platforms I'm mainly on. I'm also on Threads, if anyone wants to check out. But the main platform for me is YouTube. That's where I do the majority of my content. Anything else is the extra stuff or the continuation of the YouTube content on Instagram or Twitter.
I think
or
it's a
whatever.
good time to congratulate you for 25,000 subscribers as well, and we
Oh,
hope
thank
it's going
you.
to keep rising.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, the channel support has been absolutely fantastic. I've been astonished by the growth of it all, and that's down to everybody that's come in, and it's just it's unbelievable. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the support and the congratulations.
Of course, we hope it's going to keep rising with the voice of the sport as well. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on X, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube. Please leave a subscribe, like if you like the detour, and we'll catch you soon. See ya.